Can federal charges be dropped after an indictment in New York? Federal charges and indictments are an aspect of the criminal justice system that pertains to crimes punishable under federal law. What are considered federal charges? Crimes that might result in federal charges include, but are not limited to, the following: drug trafficking or conspiracy, racketeering and organized crime, fraud involving federal programs, such as Medicare or bank fraud, crimes committed on federal properties, such as military bases, federal buildings, or national parks, terrorism or national security offenses, white-collar crimes that involve wire fraud, mail fraud, or securities fraud, internet crimes, such as hacking or child pornography distribution. Definition of indictment. An indictment is a formal written accusation submitted by a grand jury to charge an individual with a crime, specifically a felony offense. New York State versus federal jurisdiction. The jurisdictional difference between the New York State and the federal criminal justice system stems from the specific government entity that possesses the power and authority to prosecute an alleged offense. Timeline of federal criminal cases in New York. The timeline of federal cases in New York can vary, depending on the circumstances of the case and the specific type of charges being brought. However, federal cases in New York typically follow the following timeline. Investigation. The process of federal criminal cases in New York begins with an investigation. This step involves federal law enforcement agencies such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, Drug Enforcement Administration, DEA, or other federal agencies conducting an inquiry into alleged criminal activity. Arrest and initial appearance. After the investigation and a decision to bring charges, an arrest warrant or summons may be issued for the defendant by a federal magistrate judge. The arrest could be made by local, state, or federal law enforcement agents. The role of the grand jury. In federal criminal cases, the grand jury plays a crucial role in determining whether there is enough evidence to formally charge the defendant with a felony. Pre-trial proceedings. Once the defendant has been indicted, pre-trial proceedings commence. This stage involves the exchange of information between the prosecution and defense, known as discovery. Discovery allows both sides to thoroughly examine the evidence and prepare their cases for trial. The judge will rule on these motions, shaping the scope and direction of the trial. Why federal charges may be dropped after an indictment. Just like on other criminal charges, being indicted on a federal crime does not mean a person would be automatically convicted. The defendant would be given an opportunity to argue their case in a trial. This also means that due process would still be observed and each side must adhere to the protocol and the laws strictly or risk being held in contempt or being tried for misconduct. Insufficient evidence or evidence suppression. One of the primary reasons for a federal charge to be dropped after an indictment is insufficient evidence. Insufficient evidence refers to a situation where the prosecution does not have enough evidence to meet their burden of proof. This means that they cannot show that the defendant is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Exculpatory evidence. Exculpatory evidence is evidence that tends to show that the defendant did not commit the crime with which they are charged. This evidence can be crucial in criminal cases, particularly in federal cases where the penalties can be severe. Prosecutorial misconduct. Prosecutorial misconduct refers to unethical or illegal actions taken by a prosecutor during a criminal case. Procedural errors in the grand jury process. Errors in the grand jury process can also lead to the dismissal of federal charges. The grand jury is responsible for determining whether there is enough evidence to indict a person on federal criminal charges. However, certain procedural rules must be followed during the grand jury process. If these rules are violated, the indictment may be challenged in court. Violation of constitutional rights. If a defendant's constitutional rights are violated during the investigation or prosecution of a case, the charges may be dropped. If the violation is severe enough, it can lead to the dismissal of the federal charges. Methods to request dropping federal charges in New York. Motion to dismiss the indictment. One of the most common methods to request the dismissal of federal charges is to file a motion to dismiss the indictment. Pretrial diversion programs. Pretrial diversion programs are alternatives to prosecution that can lead to the dismissal of federal charges. These programs usually involve a period of probation, community service, or other requirements. If the defendant successfully completes the program, the charges will be dropped. Plea bargaining. Plea bargaining involves the negotiation between the defense and the prosecution to reduce charges, reduce sentencing, or dismiss charges altogether in exchange for a guilty plea from the defendant. Cooperation agreements with the government. In some cases, the defendant may be able to negotiate a cooperation agreement with the government to provide information, assist in ongoing investigations, or testify against co-defendants or other individuals involved in criminal activities. In exchange for this information, the prosecution may agree to drop or reduce the charges facing the defendant. Role of the defense attorney in challenging an indictment. The role of a defense attorney is crucial in ensuring the rights and interests of an individual charged with a crime are protected throughout the criminal justice process. Challenging an indictment is a significant aspect of a defense attorney's responsibilities. Investigating the case and evidence. Filing motions on behalf of the defendant. Negotiating with the prosecutor's office. Impact of dropped charges on the defendant. When a prosecutor decides to drop criminal charges against a defendant, it can have a significant impact on the individual concerned. While the decision may ultimately be beneficial, there are still potential consequences that may arise from having the indictment dismissed. Some consequences include records of arrest and criminal proceedings. When criminal charges are dropped, it can have an immediate positive effect on the defendant. It can mean a release from custody, removal of restrictive bail conditions, or termination of probation requirements. Potential for civil action against law enforcement. In some instances, defendants whose charges have been dropped may have grounds to pursue civil action against law enforcement or other parties involved in the criminal justice process. Working with an experienced New York federal criminal attorney from Lebedin Kofman LLP. If you're facing federal charges, it's essential to have a strong legal defense on your side. At Lebedin Kofman LLP, our team of experienced federal defense attorneys is committed to protecting the rights and freedoms of our clients. Whether you're facing charges for white-collar crimes, drug offenses, or other federal crimes, we have the knowledge and experience needed to build a strong defense strategy for your case. If you're ready to take control of your situation and fight back against federal charges, contact us today to schedule a consultation. Let us help you navigate the federal criminal justice system and work toward a positive resolution for your case. Contact us today at 646-663-4430 to schedule a consultation. Lebedin Kofman LLP, criminal attorney and DWI lawyer, 26 Broadway, 3rd floor, New York, New York, 10004, United States 646-663-4430.